Good morning. Good morning and welcome to Computers and Libraries 2019. Welcome also those of you who are attending the Internet at Schools track and those of you who are attending the Library Leaders Summit. I think it's wonderful that we have people here from just about every sort of library on the planet. That would be public, university, school, government, corporate, so forth, all looking for ways to use technology to help their communities. I'm Tom Hogan, President of Information Today, your host for this conference. Computers and Libraries is all about putting good ideas into practice. Here's a quote on that theme. Hopefully this works. As gold which he cannot spend will make no man rich, so knowledge which he cannot apply will make no man wise. I'd like to see a show of hands, please. How many of you are attending your first Computers and Libraries conference? Wow. Thank you. So how many of you have been to at least one other in this series, which I guess is everybody else, right? Oh, looks like about half and half. This is the 34th annual Computers and Libraries Conference, 34 years in a row. It's amazing how this event has survived good times and, frankly, not so good times. The theme of this year's conference is user engagement in the digital age. When I hear the words user and digital together, I think of one of my favorite quotes. Computers are fast, accurate, and stupid. Humans are slow, inaccurate, and brilliant. Together they are powerful beyond belief. In spite of all the lingering troubles in the economy and in library budgets, and I might add a very disruptive government shutdown, we have an excellent turnout this year. We have 758 people attending the conference. We have 104 people signed up to visit the exhibits, and we have 83 exhibitor personnel. That makes a grand total of 945 people who are here at the conference in one form or another. With the on-site registrations we expect, we should reach about 1,000 attendees. And that's very gratifying to those of us who have been involved in this conference and exhibition all these years. We do a sort of our registration database, a sort by country and state. I'm pleased to report that we have representation from 42 states, plus the District of Columbia, obviously. We also have quite a number of countries outside the U.S. represented here this week. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read the list, but please join me in welcoming all the people who have come so far to be with us this week. Okay, the longevity of this conference is, as I mentioned, quite amazing, and to a large degree it is due to people like Jane Dysart, our conference chair. And she has a wonderful organizing committee, and you'll be hearing from Jane in just a few minutes, but I'd like to name her organizing committee because they did great work. Helen Blowers from OCLC, Marshall Breeding, Library Technology Guides, Frank Cervone, University of Illinois, Darlene Fichter, University of Saskatchewan, Richard Hulzer Consulting, Rebecca Jones, Dysart and Jones Associates, Dick Kaiser, the editor of Computers and Libraries magazine, Jill Koniesko, Zimmerman Associates, Donna Sheeter, Library Strategies International, and Hannah Summers, George Washington University. Thanks to Jane and her organizing committee. Yes, thank you. We have, as I mentioned, the Internet at Schools, and that's facilitated by Carolyn Foote from Westlake High School in Austin, Texas. And this year, as I mentioned above, we're continuing with a co-located event called Library Leaders Summit. It's sort of a conference within a conference, and that's facilitated by our own Rebecca Jones. I'd also like to thank the speakers and moderators. There's 143 we counted this year, who have kindly agreed to share their experiences and their knowledge with us. There's a speaker directory in the program where they are listed alphabetically, all the way from Stephen Abram to Jan Zastro, with their affiliations and email addresses. So you can contact them with follow-up questions and comments, maybe even develop some lifelong friendships. Our speakers are the backbones of the conference, and they make us think in new ways. This quote comes to mind. One's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original shape. I'd also like to thank the 40 organizations and companies that are represented in the exhibit hall. They support our efforts and help us keep the registration prices as low as we possibly can. So we're grateful to them. And I'll tell you just a little secret. Exhibitors go back to their companies and organizations, and they have to, supply a report. And some of the things in the report are hard numbers, like how many conversations they had, how many contacts they made. And if their bosses like the report and what they did there, they come back next year. So please put a little time aside to visit with them. A sincere thanks also to our learning partner, SLA, for their support of the conference. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Without you, there obviously is no Computers and Libraries Conference. You have our deepest thanks for your support all these 34 years. I'll leave you with one more quote. It isn't the mountain ahead that wears you out, it's the grain of sand in your shoe, which was an inspirational sign in my gym. And I have absolutely no idea what it means. I just put it up there hoping somebody can explain it to me. Anyway, please enjoy the next 3 days here at Computers and Libraries 2019. I'll now turn the podium over to our program chair, Jane Dysart. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom, and I love the sand in your shoe, and I hope you all get a little bit of sand in your shoe while you're here, something that makes you think a bit differently and get out of your comfort zone and try some different things when you get back home. So, yeah, we're going to get sand in our shoes, I think. That's a good one. I have just a couple of housekeeping notes. All of our programs are going to be on this floor, but following our keynote this morning, we have to pull some walls to separate our rooms. So at the end of our keynote talk, I'm going to ask you to go back into the foyer where there's coffee, and our keynote speaker will answer some questions and be there to say hello. And then we will have all of the various rooms for the upcoming sessions, and you can see what room you're going to be in the printed program, but they're all here on this floor, so you should be able to find them easily. Most of the information I'm going to give to you is also in the printed program, like the Wi-Fi network and the access code, which is CIL 2019, but you I'm sure have found that already. The conference app, how many of you have downloaded it? Okay, excellent. We want some feedback about how it's working and what's good and what's not, because we have several apps that we try with our various events, so be interested to hear. If you haven't, on page 21 of the booklet, you'll be able to find out how to do that. I mentioned that our coffee this morning is going to be outside of this room. And later today, at the end of our sessions at 4 o'clock, the exhibit hall is going to open on the floor above, and we will have our grand opening reception with lots of goodies to nibble and drink, and time to visit with those exhibitors that Tom mentioned. Say hello, find out what new and interesting things they have on the go. And I wanted to mention Don Hawkins, who does great work in reporting on what happens here. And you can find it on the conference blog, which is libconf.com, libconf.com. You can also post your thoughts and pictures to our CIL Facebook page, and definitely tweet with our hashtag CILDC. I've seen that lots of you have been doing that already, which is terrific. Hopefully we'll have lots of buzz around the exciting stuff that we're doing. And lots of those ideas that Tom mentioned as well. I think in this day and age, there's so much change going on that we really have to look at different things and try different things. Okay, last question for you. How many of you are having challenges with the space in your library or your organization or whatever? Aha! All right, then make sure that you are at our evening session tomorrow night, because we have some fantastic architects who I think will give us some interesting insights and ideas around space. So make sure you are there tomorrow evening. Now I'm going to move right along to our keynote speaker. And she's a wonderful lady, and I know you will enjoy what she has to say. Phaedra Boinodiris is a member of IBM's Academy of Technology, where she basically is an intrapreneur, kicking off internal startups that range from IBM's first serious games and advanced simulation program to IBM's first K-12 program, influencing curriculum in traditional and non-traditional learning spaces through entrepreneurship and social impact. She happily mentors startups from around the world at her alma mater as well, UNC Chapel Hill. She is the author of Serious Games for Business, published in 2014. Her earlier work in serious games are being used in over 1,000 schools worldwide to teach students the fundamentals of business organization. She was honored by the Women in Games International as one of the top 100 women in the games industry. And prior to working with IBM, she was a serial entrepreneur for 14 years, where she co-founded WomenGamers.com, a popular women's gaming portal. She is keenly and wholeheartedly invested in tech for good and ethics, and has recently been asked to do something further around AI and ethics in the future, and that's something that we're all concerned about. So please welcome Phaedra.
Long bio. Thank you. I'm so deeply honored to be here with you today. I'm a big fan of libraries. I'm the mother of 4 children, and my 8-year-old son is like a graphic novel Hoover vacuum. So I am there every weekend scouring. So again, very, very deeply pleased to be here with you today. What I'm going to do is talk to you about my personal journey and regale you with really interesting stories. I'll start off talking about how I ended up launching a career around serious games at IBM, and I'll explain to you what that is, as well as show you some really cool examples of some of my favorite games that are used to teach. Then I'll talk to you, the rest of my deck will be on the latter half of this arc about transformation of education and what role libraries might be able to play in that regard. So first, a little bit about me. I was really lucky to grow up in a family of technologists. My sister and I were encouraged to play with computers from a very early age, not just to take them apart, put them back together, but play on them. And we actually gravitated towards designing our own games. Now, mind you, at this time, there was no such thing as game design and development degree programs like there are today. So ended up going to school at UNC Chapel Hill, getting a degree in math and comp sci. Then graduated, worked for corporate America for about 4 years. And then my mother turned to me and said, "Hey, you're young, you're single, let's start a company." And so started working with her, and we created a company where we did custom software application development. And then shortly thereafter, my sister came to me and she says, we play computer games, our friends play, our cousins play, but they're really not targeting women. When you look at most gaming magazines or look at most gaming websites, they're not targeting us at all, and we think this is an untapped opportunity. So we started this company, womengamers.com, that's my sister and I. And we started initially reviewing games from a women's perspective. And we quickly got into the business of consulting to game studios and publishers who then wanted to target women. And at about this time, we had many people who were emailing us saying, you know, if you've got an issue with regards to the design of the games and the way that women are depicted in video games, why aren't more women designing them? So we started a scholarship program for women to pursue degrees in game design and development, the first one within the United States. So did this for some time. And then, I don't know how many of you listen to NPR, but the tech reporter for NPR, Laura Seidel, calls me up and says, hey, let's cover women in games at the big conference called the Game Developers Conference out in California. And so we're walking the halls, and it was the year that Nintendo came out with the Wii. And there was this big buzz in the air, a huge shift, a market shift in terms of the way that games were being advertised and promoted. Suddenly you saw big posters and an ad showcasing not just young men playing video games, but whole families, right? Boys, girls, women, men. And given this, I decided to go back to school to get my MBA, because I really wanted to go after VC funding, and I wanted to learn more about how to do that. So I go back to my alma mater, and I threw myself into these things called case competitions. This is when a company or an organization will go to a business school with a real-life challenge. And the students have overnight to come up with ideas, and then they've got to pitch it the next day. So I ate these up. These were so much fun. I'm on my 6th one, and IBM, why are you laughing? 6th one, IBM comes to the school, and it's a big contest between UNC and Duke, right, big basketball rivals. And the challenge was that they had this software called business process management software, and they were looking for innovative ways of explaining it to non-techies. And I had no clue what the heck business process management was, but they handed each team a stack of papers this thick. They said, go read this. And as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, oh, this is a strategy game, right? You tweak different business rules. You're seeing how it affects your broader ecosystem. You could have competing models. You could have a multiplayer version. And so I tell my teammates, hey, we need to pitch a strategy game. And there was this one guy on my team. We ended up arguing till 2 in the morning. We have to pitch at 8, right? And he says, games are for kids. IBM is too conservative of a company. They're never going to buy off on this idea. And I said, you know, the average age of the gamer today is 35 years old, right? Games can be incredibly adept at explaining complex systems. And I said, if you think it's just for men, it's not. 43% of PC gamers, 38% of console gamers are women. Right? Argue, argue, argue. He picks up his stuff and he abandons the team. Right? So the rest of us are left to go and pitch this idea the next day. So we go and we present, and unbeknownst to me, one of the judges was a VP of strategy for IBM, and she pulls me aside and she says, I'm funding this game right now. Can you make it for me in 3 months? I'm like, okay, it can take years to make a really good video game. At the time, World of Warcraft had come out, right? And I was thinking, my gosh, it took them like 7 years, and they still haven't gotten it right. So she's saying, I'm just looking for a proof of concept to see if you can use a video game to help explain something like business process management to people. So I said, okay, so I'm still doing my MBA. I'm interning for her part-time, and I work with a local game studio, and we create this game called Innovate. As I mentioned, games can be incredibly adept at explaining complex systems. And this game, we released it for free via IBM's academic initiative. And within 6 months, we had over 1,000 universities using this game to teach business process management as part of their core curriculum. So then this VP turns to me and she says, well, you know, is it just schools and professors who would be interested in a game like this, or would clients and business partners be interested? You know, is this just something for students or not? So she gives me more funding. And so we created a supply chain optimization version, traffic management. We created a smarter cities game, right? Again, explaining the complex systems which IBM sells. And they became our #1 lead generating assets for the brand that we were working with at the time. So did this for some time, and then she asked me to incubate a serious games program within IBM, again, around marketing. The games, the process optimization games, started to get the attention of the Department of Defense. So I get invited to go and present at an enterprise architecture summit that was being sponsored by a group called United States Transportation Command. And if you're unfamiliar with US Transcom, they manage the logistics across all the branches of the military so that when there's an event that happens, right, like a tsunami in Japan, for example, they've got to figure out how to get the right stuff to the right place at the right time at the right cost while coordinating with all these different organizations. So we go, and I'm asked to go and present. And right before I get up on stage, this 4-star general who's responsible for US Transcom, it only goes up to 5 stars, right? So 4-star shows a timeline, and he says, look at what has happened around the world that we've had to respond to in the last 9 months. Right? We've got earthquakes, we've got tsunamis in Japan, the earthquake in Haiti, we've got volcanoes going off in Iceland. This was back in around 2010. And he says, with all these things going around the world, how are we supposed to have been able to be prepared for even a subset of things on this list, much less all of them? And he says, even more importantly, how are we supposed to have been able to vet and create a dynamic best practice playbook with all of these various organizations? So he says, we're looking towards advanced serious games as a means to do this, to create a safe space to try things out, a safe space to vet out what our best practice should be. And then he hands the stage over to me. And I get up and I say, I talk about the business process change games. And I say, you know, we're at a unique confluence of technology where we've got these really sophisticated game engines that have the ability to integrate real data and real processes so that you can use games as a means not just to teach people, but use games for strategic execution and tactical operations. So this 4-star then pulls me aside and he says, what are you doing a month from now? Now, mind you, at this time, I'm 7 months pregnant, right? So I'm already like this. He says, what are you doing a month from now? And he says, I'd like for you, to come back and show us what would a video game look like if it was a disaster preparedness game or a disaster response game. Again, this was just post-Haiti, the Haiti disaster. So I said, okay, I'll be back in a month. About a week before the summit, I get a call from his assistant who says, the general wants you to invite whomever you want from the games industry to make your vision a reality. If you want to invite the president of Nintendo, invite the president of Nintendo. And I said, sir, how am I going to get the president of Nintendo here? It's like a week before the summit. And he says, don't worry, the invitation will come from the Secretary of Defense. It's about this time where I'm like sweating bullets, right? So we go, and I actually ended up inviting a PhD grad from NC State who I had met at the Game Developers Conference a year prior. And he had created this incredible gaming engine, which I thought was really unique. It was for multiplayer real-time strategy games. And what in effect it does is it allows you, you're trying to beat your opponent, but it allows you to change decisions over time. You can go backwards in time, shift your decision, and that change propagates to other players present. So for example, you remember the movie Back to the Future? All right, the scene where McFly is holding up a Polaroid picture, but because of something he did in the past, he's slowly fading. Remember that? His game engine works exactly the same way. I can go backwards in the past, change a decision, and that timeline actually moves to other players present, okay? think of it kind of like the next dimension of chess, right? So I invite him because I thought to myself, what better way to actually optimize a process than being able to granularly change decisions over a timeline, okay? So we go and we both co-pitch, and we're presenting, here's what the game of Haiti would look like with regards to disaster preparedness. And the 4-star pulls me aside again, and he says, what are you doing 2 weeks from now? You remember how pregnant I am at this point, right? And so he invites me here in DC. In fact, I stayed at this hotel. I was too far gone along to be allowed on a plane. So I had to take a train here with my family. And what makes it even more memorable, like it wasn't already memorable, the day we were to go and present at the Pentagon was the day that the sniper was shooting. Remember that? Okay, so it's utter and complete chaos there, right? And I finally make it into the lobby. I don't know why I'm telling you this story. I just think it's hilarious. I finally make it into the lobby, and I sit down, and I turn to the person next to me, who's obviously a military officer, and I say, I think I'm having contractions. And he says, I am too. This place does it to everybody. It's memorable, right? It's memorable. So we ended up pitching, again, this idea ended up being the Secretary of Defense and to the head of DARPA. And in fact, this book is something that was brought up almost in every single conversation we had. I don't know if, I'm sure as librarians you're all familiar with this Orson Scott Card book. There was a movie, but it wasn't that good. I mean, in comparison to the book, if you haven't read it, read the book. It's phenomenal. But it's truly prophetic in so many, many, many ways. And I didn't know that it was actually a required reading for many military officers. But in essence, this was the conversation, right? You're moving something like a business process management flow diagram to something that looks much like a multiplayer real-time strategy game over time. So anyway, this launched my career with regards to being able to incubate a serious games practice within IBM that is able to integrate real data and processes within sophisticated gaming engines. So doing this, I got the wonderful opportunity to work with all kinds of different groups, even outside of defense, right? Healthcare and other industries. And here's what I found. Games can be used to do all kinds of amazing things. And serious games is very different from gamification, and I want to point out this distinction. So serious games are when you use games to do something other than just entertainment, per the things on this list, right? And I'm sure there's even more that aren't even on here. Gamification is when you use techniques from games in order to incentivize behaviors that you're looking for in something that is otherwise not a game. For example, badging and leaderboards and point systems, right? So an important distinction. But really the holy grail for both serious games as well as gamification is the transformation of cultures within an organization. And I have seen this time and time again. So I'm going to show you some of my favorite examples of what I've seen over time. So this game was created by a friend of mine. The point of this game it reminds you, if you know World of Goo, kind of looks a little bit like World of Goo, but you're trying to build this tower to reach the glowing yellow orb up at the top. But when you hit the purple orbs, part of your infrastructure crumbles, right? In less than 8 minutes, this game will assess your approach towards critical thinking, right? So when you have a failure, how quickly do you shift to a different strategy? And how different is the strategy that you shift to? I had in case you're wondering, this is all Hungarian, but I actually had the British Ministry of Defense's cyber warfare unit play this game, right? This was a group of about 20 of them or so. And what was interesting was all of them ended up getting categorized as the same approach towards critical thinking, except for one person who happened to be their leader. And so they sort of looked at me wide-eyed, kind of like, uh-oh, we've got a big problem, right? Now, interesting. This is a game, it was showcased at a military simulations conference, a big one that the Army does in Florida every year, purely for entertainment, but I thought it was interesting that it was being showcased there. The point of this game, super simple interface, it's powered by AI that recognizes people's personalities as well as sentiment. And the point of this is there's a murder suspect. And you've got to figure out how do you communicate with this murder suspect such that you get him to uncover information about his victims. Yeah, purely for entertainment, but truly, yeah, exactly, right? But truly interesting in terms of, you have to think through, like, when he's being snarky in the game, should I be snarky back? Like, how should I characterize or communicate with this person in order to get him to tell me what I want to know? This next one, this was a game that came out some time ago, actually, by Georgia Tech to teach people about the premise of gerrymandering and how it works and what it looks like. Fantastic game. This is a game, certainly we could use that in our state of North Carolina, coming from North Carolina, right? This is a game, I couldn't resist, sorry. Cyber defense training, also a multiplayer real-time strategy game. Powered by an AI that is extremely compelling. Actually, I've seen games being used to teach people about cybersecurity in a couple of different ways. AI in particular being used in a couple of different ways. In this game, AI is being used as a coach, right? So that when you have a question or a particular challenge, you can ask a question of the AI. There's others where the AI is getting smarter over time, watching your gameplay. So also very interesting to see. This is a fantastic game, if you haven't heard of this. Built back in 2008 out of the University of Washington. Zoran Popovic was the professor behind this. But in essence, this is a casual game that, again, was being used to figure out how to crowdsource or to mine behaviors to learn about patterns around protein folding. They had this big challenge that had taken scientists about 15 years to be able to come up with the right protein structure for the monkey virus associated with the AIDS epidemic. And in about 10 days, middle school kids, in aggregate, after playing this casual game, came up with the correct protein structure. So again, very interesting to see how are games now collectively being used in order to solve very complex problems like this. As an aside, I called up the professor, Zoran, after this hit the news back in 2008, and I said, hey, what does it feel like to be rich and famous? And he says, well, you're going to laugh, but my phone's been ringing off the hook by VC companies and pharma companies who want to give me more funding. So he says, I did a test, and I put the logo of a pharma company on the game's website. And he says, guess what happened? Guess what happened, right? People stopped playing. They stopped playing. I thought it was an extremely valuable lesson, right? Know your players and why they would play a game for good, right? Even though it takes a pharma company to put a drug through the FDA, irrelevant. According to the gamers who were playing this, they were doing this for social good. So these are really interesting games. The one in the top left is a game that was being created to train soon-to-be physicians, right? That were about to go out in the field, soon-to-be medics. And you play this game while you're wearing biofeedback devices, right? So it's measuring your heart rate and your pulse and your body temperature. And you're doing triage in the game to all these patients coming in. And if you can't keep your heart rate down, right, you never get through that line. It gets worse, right? So it's actually trying to train you how to better manage your stress. In this same simulation conference that was showcasing this game is this game here on the bottom right called Nevermind. It's a horror game, right? And in this game, as you're wearing the biofeedback devices, if you can't manage your heart rate, the game gets scarier, right? Interesting, interesting. It doesn't all have to be video games. There are some fantastic board games that are used to teach. This one is being used actually to shift organizations' cultures to be more entrepreneurial. Fantastic. This is a game out of a startup out of Israel. Really fantastic. So now I get to do my segue into the world of education. I had this incredible epiphany moment that I'm dying to tell you about. So while I was the global lead for serious games at IBM, I got a phone call from a teacher out in Texas, a teacher at a high school. And the story goes something like this. He's a teacher, he teaches computer science, but the way that he teaches it is through serious game design. And he says every year he has an organization sponsor a theme for his class. And that year it was the Center for Disease Control. And the theme that they had requested of his class was that they wanted his class to design a video game that teaches kids about pathogens and pandemics, right? So his kids reskinned Minecraft such that you can fly a nanobot through a human body. And when the nanobot meets with the pathogen, the class wanted to be able to communicate with IBM's AI, Watson, which has been trained in pathogens, so that from within the game, you could ask questions like, how would I recognize signs of tuberculosis, right, as an example. So immediately, I'm intrigued by this class. I learned several things right off the bat. First of all, the level of engagement of the students in his class are off the charts engagement. Second is, this is not a fancy schmancy school. This is a school for disadvantaged teens. Disadvantaged teens, right? So over 80% of the kids get free or reduced lunches. And another thing I noted really quickly was while I was talking to the students, because we were Skyping in regularly, there was this one young woman in particular, she's actually in this video, and I asked her, I said, why are you taking this class? And she says, you know, my dad has been deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan on multiple tours of duty, and the only thing that helps him really manage his stress is by playing video games. And she says, I'm devoting my career towards understanding games for health, in particular mental health. So I started asking her questions like, oh, did you hear of the Tetris study? Did you hear what came out of Carnegie Mellon? And she knew all the research I did, and I had been in this field for quite some time by that point. So I am so impressed by this class that I convinced IBM's PR and comms department to fly a TV crew out with me to Texas. And we filmed this short little documentary video, right? And next thing I know, the video goes viral, and the teacher and I are invited around the world to different education summits to present about this project. Then he's flown out to the White House to be recognized by President Obama as being a champion of change for education, okay? 2 weeks after this, I get a phone call from him, and he says, Phaedra, I think I'm gonna lose my job. And I said, how is this possible? How is it possible you're gonna lose your job? He wasn't just working with IBM, he wasn't just working with the Center for Disease Control, he had NASA in there, he had Google, he had Microsoft, right? So I said, how is this possible? And he says, well, the principal doesn't understand what I'm trying to do. I am not teaching towards any standardized test. The librarians are nodding. Not teaching towards any standardized test. I'm using an entrepreneurial model in my classroom, right? The kids are coming up with their own business plans. We've got rotating leadership. He said, I don't know what to do. They don't know how to measure success in a classroom like mine. So I convinced him to go and have breakfast with the superintendent. I said, go have breakfast with him, tell him everything. And so he goes and has breakfast. And the superintendent, I found out later, says to him, this is on me. I've got to figure out how to give you air cover. Not just so that your class can flourish, but that we actually take the same sort of approach and try to nurture this across the school district. So next thing I know, the principal, the assistant principal, the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, the head of curriculum, the teacher, like this veritable army from Texas, flies out to North Carolina to do a design thinking session about culture change within the classroom. And the first place I dragged them is to a library. And guess which library I took them to? NC State's, very good. Hunt Library at NC State, which is a phenomenal place. And I was telling them, you know, we're on the cusp of this massive technology tsunami, and we must rethink not just what we're teaching, but how we are teaching it, because we can't possibly be adaptable and agile enough, right? So this all unlocked the opportunity for kids graduating from his class to intern at the Watson Lab out in Austin, Texas for the very first time. It was the first time that we were interning high school students, right? And what I love the most about this story is it's not a story about technology, it's a story about culture and cultural transformation. So this is one of the projects that the kids are doing now. So the task was take an old toy and make it new and smarter and solving a problem, right? So you guys recognize this? Hungry, hungry hippos, right? So what they did was they bought a used brainwave monitoring device off of eBay for 25 bucks, and they hooked up Arduinos to the hippos, such that without your hands, right, the only way you can get the hippos to eat the marbles is by going into a semi-meditative state. So I asked the kids, I said, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And they look at me like I am really stupid. And they said, we're training Jedi? Duh, right? So the kids are play testing this new smart toy to other kids going through chemotherapy at the Dell Children's Hospital. Right, super cool, super cool. So this whole thing inspired me so much. The whole medical Minecraft story and the culture transformation and the Cinderella story actually ran for the open school board seat for my county. I didn't get it, alas, but my vice president found out about it and asked if I would incubate a K-12 program, which was really, really fun. And I said I would do it, but I only want to do it if I can collaborate with the United Nations and have it be around social impact and play. So I had a tremendously fun time with that. So I'll give you some examples of things we came up with. But, you know, being at IBM has given me a tremendous vantage point. And as I was alluding to earlier, we are on this cusp, right, of a technology tsunami in the form of AI and automation and robotics, right? And our former president was so concerned about what does this mean in terms of job displacement that wage insurance was one of the things he was considering. And in fact, there are many Scandinavian countries that are also piloting this idea. So there's even greater concern when results of polls like this one come out, right? Where people really don't see this tsunami coming and how might it affect the jobscape and what it might look like, right? So it really it begs the question of what do we do with regards to education, right? How do we change this model in order to get ahead of this, in order to be able to be agile and adapt quickly enough? I think the first step is this mindset shift, right? Moving from school-centered education to more of a student or learner-centered education. Additionally, I think one of the things that we really need to consider is the embracing of new business models. And how I came up with this idea is this premise of if you buy off on the idea that we must make use of a broader ecosystem of resources in order to get ahead of education, right? Then we actually have to give students credit for things they learn, not just from formal settings, not just from classrooms, but also informal settings too, like libraries, as an example, right? Online courses, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, after-school programs. We've got to figure out how do we get them credit for it. So I found out about this technology called blockchain, and I would just want to spend like 5 minutes explaining what the heck this is, so you can see how it might connect. So how many of you are familiar with blockchain? All right, that's a lot of people. All right, so for those who aren't familiar, I know most of you, or probably all of you, have heard of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. What blockchain is the underlying technology that makes cryptocurrency possible. And there's two forms. There's anonymous, and then there's permissioned. And enterprise use is using very much the permissioned blockchain. What this means is, let's say we were trading something. I was trading this bottle of water, and you put it on your ledger that you received it, and then you trade something back, whether it's water or whether it's data. If we each use our own individual ledgers to keep track of our trades, you know that there's going to be mistakes. You know that eventually there will be fraud, especially if we open it up to a larger group. And the premise behind blockchain is, instead of each of us having our own ledgers, we're actually sharing a distributed ledger. And there's the big distinction with this, and it is permissioned, right? So an example, let's say I go to the store down the street to buy beer, and I get carded. Not very likely, but I get carded. And I show the cashier my driver's license. On my driver's license, there's a ton of information about me. Not only is there my name and my date of birth, but my address, my blood type, like all this information that she has no business knowing. All she really needs to know is that I'm over 21, right? So with something like a blockchain, I can go and put my thumbprint on a pad, and in that microsecond, give this cashier the authorization to know that I'm 21 and no other information after that, and then have it rescinded, right? So it gives me the ability to granularly control what kind of data is imparted and at what point in time, and have it be authenticated. Right? Another example is, let's say I go and I buy a chicken salad sandwich from Walmart. I can go and scan that chicken salad sandwich with my mobile phone, my smartphone, and it will check on a blockchain each ingredient within that sandwich and tell me whether the lettuce was contaminated with E. coli, right? And whether it's been recalled. So very important. So what does this mean in terms of education? Think about LinkedIn as an example. I assume most of us have LinkedIn profiles, maybe not all of us. But right now, I could go onto LinkedIn, right, and I put my education and the jobs I've had. I could put up there that I'm President of the United States and nobody would stop me, right? Imagine if instead a model might be, as I learn things over time, again, from formal and informal learning settings, there is one place that keeps track of all those credentials, not one single educational institution that I went to for 4 years or 6 years or 8 years. Like, I don't have to go back there for my transcript. This is something that could follow me throughout my lifetime with authenticated proof. That's the premise behind this idea of blockchain and micro-credentialing, and keeping something like this, of keeping track of how is it that students can get credit for things that they learn via an authenticated system. And so we're seeing some really interesting pilots associated with this, really interesting pilots. We've got the entire country of Malta who's now adopted this. We've got the city of Dallas, which has moved forward with a model. And what's interesting about the Dallas Promise, they have a 6-year associate's degree program, right? And they were trading student records, not just from K through 12 ISDs, but the community college system, university colleges, and then on to recruiters. And they were one of the first to embrace a blockchain for micro-credentialing infrastructure that started in kindergarten and goes up through higher ed to continuing education. And what I think is really critical about this is that it's really critically important to make sure that K through 12 is in there too, because I fear if they're left out of these blockchain networks, these blockchain implementations, it will only worsen the digital and the economic divide. Here's another interesting thing that we've been seeing as part of some of these pilots is, as AI gets smarter and learns about students, right? It can start to curate personalized learning. So for example, as it knows about me and what my interests are, it could say, hey, did you know about this internship which just opened up? Or this apprenticeship? Or this online course? Or hey, there's a new program at the local library. Right? So these are examples in which AI can start to curate content in that regard. And as I mentioned, democratizing education, I think, is really key. Because let's say I'm a student at at a rural school that doesn't have a robotics teacher or someone who can teach me in drone maintenance, right? Which might be a hot job coming up, right? How is it that I can go and make a living by taking a course in my local library or via online in order to be able to get credit and get recruited for something like that? So the third major space I want to talk about is what would this look like? What are great ways in being able to introduce these new collar competencies using digital engagement in not just school systems, but potentially libraries for credit? What might that look like? So I'll give you some examples. Right, and I know there's so many wonderful examples of libraries really working to transform themselves, much like the Hunt Library has embraced maker spaces, right? This picture here on the left is actually a startup that came out of NC State where the entrepreneurs took these massive trucks, 16-wheeler trucks, and outfitted them with maker spaces that could roll right up to rural schools and libraries. Right, very cool example. But I would also say that creating or curating projects around social good is really key too. And this is one of the things that I noted working on this K through 12 STEM program is that in collaboration with the United Nations, in particular their 17 Sustainable Development Goals, being able to curate curriculum that introduces kids to, for example, artificial intelligence or blockchain or data science, but with a purpose. This made a huge difference in terms of the level of engagement of the kids. So, one of the questions that we've been working hard to raise is having industry, government sponsors, et cetera, sponsor projects, right? Sponsor projects around social good. This is one of the first curriculum that we launched in the K through 12 program. We were teaching kids how to build empathetic conversation bots. So if you're familiar with what a chat bot is, right? This actually combines other forms of AI that, again, measures social sentiment as well as personality. And the premise behind this was I can actually curate a more meaningful conversation via my chatbot if I know what emotion you're feeling, right? If you're angry at me, my conversation with you is going to be very different than if you're happy, right? Same thing with personality. The more I know about someone, the more I can tailor and curate a conversation that's actually going to be meaningful, okay? So we were teaching this to kids, and one of the key principles of designing an empathetic conversation bot is design thinking, that you actually need to take time to understand the people you're designing this for. And this was really, really important, because as we were working with middle school kids, right? And the middle school kids, the problem they wanted to tackle was they wanted to create an empathetic conversation bot which helped other kids better manage stress during exams. And they wanted to incorporate jokes and music, okay? So they quickly discovered that the hard part of designing an empathetic conversation bot that helps other kids better manage their stress is trying to figure out what's going to work to change this person's behavior. It wasn't as much the code as much as it was understanding psychology, right? And this was a big aha moment for the class, right? Because there were so many people who were like, I'm not a coder, I'm not a programmer, but they were brought in to really emphasize, hey, we need help designing this so that it works to help manage people's stress, right? That's why I call it STEAM, not STEM, right? More of a focus on arts and humanities. We did another project. This was the Marchesa brand at the Met Gala. We sewed in little LED lights into a gown that was showcased at the Met Gala. And the way that these LED lights would work is if someone tweeted using a sentiment about the Met Gala, the dress would glow different colors, okay? So if I said, I'm really pissed off, I'm stuck in traffic, I'm gonna be late to the hashtag Met Gala, right? The dress might glow red, okay? And so we started to introduce this recipe to other kids, right? Those kids who are really big into fashion and don't really see how does that connect them, what is their path in the future with regards to technology, right? Guess what the kids gravitated towards? Activism, right? I want my t-shirt to glow a different color as people are expressing different emotions with regards to Silent Sam on UNC's campus and the removal of the Confederate statue. I want this art projection on the side of a building to change form and change color based on how people are tweeting about climate change. Activism, right? Really wonderful, really fascinating. This is another project that we did. If you've ever been to Durham, there's this kind of dive bar called the Pinhook, right? That's really known for its DJs. And I competed against live DJs up on stage. And here's how it worked, right? I had my side of the stage where I had my laptop running Watson on it. And on the other side of the stage were live DJs. And audience members would come up to me and tell me their Twitter handle, right? I would type it in. Watson would mine their Twitter handle to determine the person's personality and then auto-compose music, right? Okay, so it's playing music, and then the person would trot over to the other side of the stage, and the DJ had the opportunity to ask that person 3 questions to determine their personality, like, what's your zodiac sign? Or are you a cat or a dog person? And then they would determine, oh, you're so Purple Rain by Prince, and then play the song. And then the audience would clap. But what's the most interesting about this, and it was fun, but the most interesting thing was the conversation that happened afterwards. Right? The conversation about music and artificial intelligence and creativity and what that even looks like moving forward. A wonderful, wonderful, wonderful conversation. So if you've got, again, people who are really interested in the arts and the humanities, this is a wonderful way to get them engaged. As I mentioned, I'm really interested, very interested in AI and ethics. And in fact, I'm currently pursuing a PhD in AI and ethics thanks to the European Union, which I am really, really grateful for. I have 4 children, as I mentioned, so I never leave an opportunity to teach on the table, right? So we were asked by Marbles Kids Museum, my friend and I were asked to go and present something cool for kids. So we worked with a local high school called Raleigh Charter High School. And we worked together to create an AI-powered Harry Potter sorting hat. Okay, so if you're familiar with the stories, you put on the hat, and through some kind of magic data mining of the brain, it will determine which Hogwarts house you are supposed to be in, right? And it will shout out the house, right? Gryffindor, Slytherin. So with our version, right, we programmed an AI such that as you recite things like, I happen to love talking to snakes, or I am very brave, right? The algorithm is going to go and parse and put you into your correct house and shout out the house. And it was funny because we invite, again, Raleigh Charter High School to help build this with us, and it happened to be their makerspace club, so they show up in the IBM lobby with their soldering kits. They're like, they were so into it, right? It wasn't enough that the hat has to shout out the name of the Hogwarts house. The lips on it needed to move, right? They were really insistent. Gryffindor. They had to get the right movement, blah, blah. It was so funny. Anyway, so we show up at the Marbles Museum. And again, I really wanted to teach, in particular, my kids, a lesson about AI and bias, right? So I programmed the AI such that if my kids put on the hat and said their names, that it would put them in Slytherin. Right? Which is what happened, right? They put the hat on, and they cross their arms, they're staring at me, Mom, you programmed this, blah, blah. And I said, let this be a lesson to you. Never, ever trust an AI that is not fully transparent. You need to be able to query that AI. How did it come up with that decision? Right? Never forget this. And I said, you don't like my cooking? Slytherin. You didn't vote the same way I voted? Slytherin. Right? You know, they are never, ever going to forget that lesson. So, in summary, if this is something, this space is of interest to you, there are so many amazing resources for you that will give you tons of examples of other serious games which are truly compelling, being used to teach. There's a serious game summit, which happens every year. There's a Games for Change Summit, which happens in New York. It's very popular. If you're interested in teaching with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, there's lots and lots of curriculum online. In fact, I would encourage you to mine these hashtags around the SDGs. And if you're interested in a blockchain for education pilot or trying to figure out like who's interested in one in this region, please feel free to reach out to me and know that you're not alone. I do encourage you to join forces because that is what is really key. You know, Digital Promise, Participate, Education Reimagined. I mean, these are all organizations that are really hyper-focused on this pursuit. All right, so I know I've said a lot to you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for entertaining me. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.